Happy Carol season.
December was 2 months ago.
Every season is Carol season.
Sure, Jan.
Carol has officially been out for over a decade now, but the film's topicality hasn't waned in the slightest. Released in the winter of 2015, Carol is, by basic definition, a love story between two vastly different women. Therese Belovit is a young, lonely, aspiring photographer, and the titular Carol Aird is a soon-to-be divorcee who's trapped in the middle of a messy custody battle.
God, this hat is cutting off circulation in my brain.
The movie is a fairly faithful adaptation of Patricia Highsmith's 1952 novel, The Price of Salt. Highsmith was an extremely prolific author, with the bulk of her bibliography being composed of psychological thrillers. But in order to avoid being pigeonholed as a lesbian book writer, Highsmith published The Price of Salt under the pseudonym Claire Morgan. This pen name persisted until the year 1990, when Highsmith finally agreed to take ownership of her cult classic work. This development also coincided with the novel's official change in title. Per Highsmith's request, all subsequent republishings of The Price of Salt would bear the name Carol.
And I knock on her door and I say, Carol! Carol!
I personally prefer the novel's original title.
Carol is obviously a key figure in the story, but she's not the main character. That would be Therese. But Patricia Highsmith over-identified as Therese, and thusly saw the object of our POV character's desire to be another person instead of something internal or reflective.
While this reading isn't necessarily untrue, I find the inherent poeticism of the first title to be infinitely more engaging.
It's a loose reference to the biblical tale of Lot's wife, who was turned into a pillar of salt after she looked back at the town of Sodom during its destruction by God.
There's also a line near the end of the book that equates love with seasoning and flavor.
After Therese hears a song in public that she can't disassociate from her time with Carol, she thinks to herself, the music lived, but the world was dead. And the song would die one day. But how would the world come back to life? How would its salt come back?
Just for the record, some of the other options Highsmith considered were The Bloomingdale Story, The Argument of Tantalus, and The Blasphemy of Laughter, the last of which is an absolutely amazing title. And were I James Somerton, I would steal that bitch without hesitation.
No!
The novel is good. Not good for a piece of lesbian pulp fiction, just good.
If you haven't read it yet, I sincerely recommend that you do. Highsmith's writing style is very engaging, and her ability to articulate queer thoughts and sensibilities is phenomenal, especially since she wrote this book during a time when the vocabulary for these experiences was severely limited.
The scene where Therese's boyfriend cuts her kite loose is particularly noteworthy to me.
It's laden with subtext about gender dynamics, relational disparities, and the ways in which conventional tethers trap us in undesirable roles.
Richard groaned, failing again. He was trying to get the kite up by running with it. Therese, sitting on the ground with her arms around her knees, watched him put his head up and turn in all directions, as if he had lost something in the air.
Here it is!
She got up, pointing.
Yes, but it's not steady.
Richard ran the kite into it anyway, and the kite sagged on its long string, then jerked up as if something had sprung it. It made a big arc, then began to climb in another direction.
It's found its own wind,
Therese said.
Yes, but it's slow.
What a gloomy Gus. Can I hold it?
Wait till I get it higher.
Richard pumped at it with long swings of arms, but the kite stayed at the same place in the cold, sluggish air. The golden domes of the cathedral wagged from side to side, as if the whole kite were shaking its head no, and the long limp tail followed foolishly, repeating the negation.
Best we can do,
Richard said.
It can't carry any more string.
Their ensuing conversation appears almost word for word in the film, but instead of taking place in an open, hilly park, the two of them walk through the claustrophobic confines of New York City with nary a kite in sight.
I understand why they chose to omit this piece of symbolism. It's a little on the nose, but I still mourn its absence here nonetheless.
I don't mean people like that. I just mean two people who fall in love with each other, say a boy and a boy out of the blue.
I don't know anyone like that.
This is essentially the movie and book's shared thesis statement.
Carol and Therese aren't particularly interested in labeling themselves or their relationship for that matter. The word lesbian is never even said by any of the characters.
She had heard about girls falling in love, and she knew what kind of people they were and what they looked like. Neither she nor Carol looked like that. Yet the way she felt about Carol passed all the tests for love and fitted all the descriptions.
Screenwriter Phyllis Nagy sees this as one of the work's more radical qualities. Neither woman suffers from a guilt-induced breakdown over being gay, and the lovers defied stereotypical portrayals of lesbianism by not being butch or mere sex objects for the male gaze.
I don't exactly disagree with this praise, but it's worth pointing out that butch-presenting sapphics have always been the recipients of unjustified hostility.
Our society's adherence to rigid gender norms has led to the pseudo-villainization of anyone who doesn't conform to these strict standards, with butch women in specific being seen as non-respectable queers. This sense of discomfort isn't just restricted to a heterosexual mindset. In 1956, the Daughters of Bilitis started printing a groundbreaking newsletter called The Ladder. Though these pamphlets did a commendable job of educating people, many of its issues urged for gay women to present themselves as proper, unthreatening ladies. By deferring to respectability politics, the DOB alienated people of color, trans women, and of course, butches.
That doesn't seem fair.
Carol and Therese were indeed a valuable milestone for queer representation, but never forget that
The film makes a few more obvious changes to the source material.
most of these alterations exist to benefit and bolster the story's presentation within a visual medium. Therese's interest in photography replaces her aspirations to be a theatrical set designer.
These two hobbies may seem superficially different, but they're ultimately homoousian. Both art forms are about capturing the essence of people and places and how the two commingle with one another amidst their juxtaposition.
It's like physics. Bouncing off each other like pinballs.
Carol and Therese's first encounter at the department store also plays out a little differently.
Book Carol buys herself a brown valise, whereas movie Carol is out shopping for her daughter's Christmas present. Much to the latter's dismay, the doll she's looking for is out of stock.
What did you want when you were this age?
A train set.
This conversation isn't just a sales pitch, it's a subtle way of expressing non-traditional desires in a public space.
Trains are stereotypically seen as a toy meant for boys. This false assumption is just one of our society's many nonsensical gender constructs. Much like how the color pink has been deemed feminine, and emotional sensitivity is understood to be unmasculine. To quote my own father, trains are for everyone. They are the peak of human innovation, a bastion of brilliance that shows us what the world could and should be.
My mother's lock screen is a picture of me, my sister, and my nephew, and my dad's lock screen is a picture of the Union Pacific 4014 steam locomotive engine they've dubbed Big Boy. I know where I rank in his heart. Several Carol-centric scenes are completely unique to the movie.
These much-needed cutaways make her intentions infinitely more accessible than her novel counterparts. Highsmith deliberately obfuscates Carol's motives, which contributes to much of the book's tension. But Nagy understood that Carol needed to be sympathetic in order for audiences to root for her.
I might get away by myself. At least for a few days.
Nagy was actually friends with Highsmith before the author passed away in 1995, hence why her additions here feel so fitting and respectful.
Tell me you know what you're doing. I don't. I never did.
Fun fact, Sarah and Kate actually got drunk whilst filming this scene.
Really? You think you got what it takes to handle a redhead?
I'd say this is the Sapphic trivia equivalent to, did you know that Viggo Mortensen broke his toe when he kicked his helmet in the Twin Towers? But I've yet to meet a fellow gay girl who doesn't also love The Lord of the Rings.
I am no man.
The character who underwent the most significant page-to-screen transformation is Hargis Aird, Carol's soon-to-be ex-husband.
Mr. Aird is a one-dimensional antagonist in the book. He primarily exists to create conflict, and his narrative presence is rarely ever physical.
The threat he poses to Carol and Therese's relationship is akin to a haunting of sorts.
He's a dark shadow that looms overhead, a menacing microcosm of all the obstacles they face from the world at large. American society is patriarchal at its core, but Sapphic couples subsist outside of these parameters. A man has no place in this relationship, yet the two women still cannot escape Harge.
How do you know my wife?
Kyle Chandler's performance successfully humanizes Harge.
He's not just a stand-in for the world's oppressively traditional values. He's a fellow prisoner, trapped by the grief and disappointment he feels as his ideal life crumbles around him, the life that every straight cis man is taught to strive for.
I love her.
I can't help you with that.
If you're wondering why he looks so familiar, Chandler also played the Bomb Squad guy from Grey's Anatomy seasons 2 and 3. Talk about a killer performance. The film's portrayal of Harge is reminiscent of a great Harry Chapin song.
And the cat's in the cradle and
More so a storyteller than a singer, Chapin's best characters were realistically flawed men who fell victim to society's unfair expectations. In response to this unfairness, these men make stupid and reprehensible choices that are somehow still fundamentally sympathetic.
If he can't have me, I can't have Wendy.
Harge sues for full custody of their daughter to punish Carol for not wanting him. This move is indefensible, but it is understandable to a certain extent. The man desperately wants to keep his family together, but holding Carol hostage solves nothing, and Wendy is not a pawn to use in their negotiations.
This realization dawns on him during their final meeting with the divorce lawyers.
What use am I to her, to us, if I'm living against my own grain?
Fellow YouTuber James Woodall made an excellent video breaking down the scene in its entirety. I highly recommend it. Carol's speech is so beautiful and moving that even the minute clerk tears up, and the expression on Harge's face implies that her words definitely got through to him.
And we're not ugly people, Harge.
Personally speaking, I've always found Richard to be the more insidious male character.
Therese speaks very highly of you.
Therese's boyfriend is privileged with the luxury of ignorance. His obliviousness is not sinister in nature, but it's still emblematic of his innate sense of entitlement.
You should stop by on Christmas sometime. My mom's sort of planning on it.
This is not an invitation, it's a subtle demand, and Therese is well aware of this fact.
She envied him. His faith there would always be a place, a home, a job, someone else for him. She envied him that attitude. She almost resented his having it.
Richard has no idea what introspection is, and he treats his relationship with Therese like a mandatory checklist rather than an authentic expression of love.
You made me buy boat tickets!
She didn't make him do anything.
I got a better job for you!
That is literally the opposite of a problem.
I asked you to marry me, for Christ's sakes!
She's not obligated to say yes.
It's also worth noting that Richard is the only person who calls Therese Terry.
Sorry, I have to go.
Terry!
There's nothing wrong with giving your significant other a nickname, but it's heavily implied that Therese has already had to change parts of her name to sound less Czech. Eastern European immigrants weren't always seen as white, so these families Americanized their surnames in an attempt to blend in and avoid discrimination.
Bible? Ooh, that name's gotta go.
Within this historical context, Richard calling Therese Terry feels like yet another example of him warping his girlfriend's identity to meet his wants and needs.
Contrast this with the reverence Carol speaks with during their lunch date.
Therese Balavat. It's lovely.
Carol also gives Therese the ability to choose whether or not to go on a road trip with her, whereas Richard just expects her to follow him overseas.
Come to France with me. Let's get married.
Richard, I'm not ready for that. I can't just make myself.
12 seconds later.
Would you?
Yes. Yes, I would.
Carter Burwell's score is simply sublime. It's both ethereal and grounded, as if the very substance of yearning itself was captured by his music. He's one of my favorite modern composers, writing for such masterpieces as Gods and Monsters, the original Buffy the Vampire Slayer movie, and of course, Twilight.
You better hold on tight, Spider Monkey.
There are things to criticize about Carol, but these critiques need to exist in conversation with broader studies pertaining to queerness and how it's portrayed in media.
The most obvious point of contention is the age gap between Carol and Therese, a facet of the story that's even more extreme in the book.
Imagine willingly dating a 19-year-old. That frontal lobe isn't even medium rare yet.
Their age difference informs a significant chunk of the couple's interactions, with Carol often assuming a maternal role out of habit. Therese, in turn, constantly defers to Carol's judgment because she implicitly trusts the older woman, though whether or not this trust exists solely because Carol is older is up for debate.
I'll have the cream spinach over poached eggs and dry martini with an olive.
I'll have the same.
Age gaps aren't especially uncommon in queer relationships. In a weird way, they've become somewhat normalized.
How else are you supposed to learn? Reasons one of author Elizabeth Lindsay Rogers' gay friends. In an essay from her nonfiction collection Miss Southeast, Rogers explores this phenomenon in depth by dissecting its murky consent and power imbalance issues. There's an incredibly fine line between just making excuses for abusive behavior and acknowledging the significance of being introduced to a non-heteronormative world. Could I write my story, she asks, as one where an older woman ushered a younger woman, girl, into an erotic life, helping her to see a future of belonging after childhood years of feeling set apart, full of embarrassing longing? Do some queers have a sort of automatic peerdom that overrides age difference? Or are we merely buying into the same patriarchal crap as straight people by repeating a tired song in a different key?
I mean, I want to ask you things, but I'm not sure that you want that.
Ask me things, please.
Many of the questions posited by Rogers unintentionally refer to a concept known as queer time.
Originally coined by academic Jack Halberstam, this theory builds upon the works of Paul-Michel Foucault, a French historian and philosopher who argued that homosexuality threatens people as a way of life rather than a way of having sex. A heteronormative approach to adulthood is marked by distinct, age-related accomplishments: getting married, having kids, buying a house, starting a career. Since most of these mile markers used to be unavailable to queer people, their relationships with time and space also became queer.
What is it you want? Another 40 minutes with you.
This lack of chrononormativity starts in childhood because proto-gay children often do not make sense of their desires, pleasures, or experiences as gay until they are older. They become gay children only after their childhood ends. Thus, they never are what they latently were.
You're in a trance!
I'm wide awake. I've never been more awake in my life. Why don't you leave me alone?
Meeting Carol is indeed the inciting incident for Therese's entire character arc.
At the start of the film, she's meek, directionless, and indecisive, simply going through the motions because she knows no other course of action. Her feelings for Richard are all but non-existent, despite the fact that he seems like an ideal romantic partner. She enjoys photography, but doesn't allow herself to pursue it seriously because she doubts her own skill set and has bought into the dreaded toolbox fallacy.
I mean, I haven't sold anything or even shown a picture to someone who could buy one. I don't even have a decent camera.
Therese sees her indecisiveness as an extension of her selfishness.
She accepts everything that's offered to her because she thinks if she says yes enough times, then she'll eventually learn what she wants. But instead of getting answers, this approach only leaves her with more questions.
Because I just take everything and I don't know anything and I don't know what I want. And how could I when all I ever do is say yes to everything?
Carol encourages Therese to actively voice her desires and chase her long-held dreams.
She buys her a new camera, stokes her suppressed ambitions, and helps her develop a casual level of confidence that manifests itself during everyday situations.
Why not take the presidential suite? I mean, if the rate's attractive.
The Ritz Tower scene is the culminating moment of Therese's growth.
Carol reaches back out to her after months of no contact, and the two women have a tense discussion over tea.
What? Nothing.
We actually see this scene twice, once without any context, and again with a much better understanding of its significance and scope.
The movie opens with Jack, one of Therese's acquaintances, interrupting their conversation like a tactless bowling ball.
Therese, is that you?
Carol leaves without any fanfare, and Therese rides with Jack to a party. During the drive there, Therese reflects on her past with Carol, which completely recontextualizes everything we just saw. It wasn't just two friends hanging out together. It was a desperate Hail Mary. Carol pleaded with Therese to take her back, but Therese, now fully mature and self-assured, did something she never would have done before meeting Carol. She says no.
I love you.
Therese, is that you?
This scene actually pays homage to the film Brief Encounter, which ends with an unwitting intruder interrupting the main couple's final meeting.
We've still got a few minutes.
Laura, what a lovely surprise.
Would you?
Oh, I don't think so.
Carol doesn't end here, though. We see Therese attend Dan and Phil's party. No, not that Dan and Phil. Though she probably would have had more fun if those two were the hosts.
We've got a thread connecting us wherever we go, and if we go too far, we'll have a heart attack. Look, he's dying.
Therese is even approached by another woman who attempts to flirt with her, but Therese is having none of it.
You're Phil's friend, aren't you?
I am, yes, and Danny's.
Aren't you going to ask me how I knew that?
Aren't most people here Phil's friends?
Bored now.
Motivated and unflappable, Therese leaves the party, hails a cab, and for the first time ever, seeks out what she wants of her own volition. She brushes past the server and scours the oak room, until her eyes finally spot who she's looking for.
It would be Carol, in 1,000 cities, 1,000 houses, in foreign lands where they would go together, in heaven and in hell. Therese walked toward her.
In a letter Carol wrote to Therese, she claimed that there are no accidents, and that everything comes full circle.
Though I don't personally agree with these beliefs, their reunion is a testament to its credence.
To once again quote Rogers, I want to believe it's self-knowledge that finally determines whether any relationship with an older person is instructive, judicious, plain abusive, a mix, or none of the above. It also seems possible for the balance of things with someone older to evolve over time, even if the origins seem questionable.
The age gap will always make me uncomfortable, but at the end of the day, my opinion isn't the one that matters.
Therese deciding to be with Carol is her conscious choice, and all we can do is respect it.
That's that.
Though not a particularly common critique of Carol specifically, a recurring piece of modern discourse is whether or not gay characters should only be played by gay actors.
To say this issue is complex would be a gross understatement. Acting is literally the practice of pretending to be something you're not. But having certain life experiences does lend to a performance's overall authenticity.
It changes. Nobody's fault.
I think my biggest pushback here is that it requires an actor to be out.
Sexuality is fluid, and labels are a double-edged sword. They help us craft meaningful identities, but they can also limit our realm of personal understanding. See this video essay by Khadija Mbawe if you'd like to hear more. A cruel irony within Hollywood is that most low-budget films won't get made unless a bona fide star is attached to the project, and most big-name actors identify as straight.
Carol is no exception to this phenomenon.
The film was trapped in production hell for years until Cate Blanchett got cast as the titular character, and her performance was rightfully lauded as exceptional.
She doesn't just play Carol, she is Carol.
Just when you think it can't get any worse, you run out of cigarettes.
With that being said, I do think trans actors deserve first right of refusal for trans roles.
Theirs is an experience few people will ever know, and that kind of representation deserves to be handled with the utmost care and respect.
What you're doing is crazy. But another part of me knew that it wasn't. That it was survival.
Sapphic period dramas tend to run a wild gamut of quality.
Portrait of a Lady on Fire is beautifully shot but narratively unambitious. Vita and Virginia sacrifices historical accuracy in order to play into tired cliché tropes, and the SNL skit poking fun at Ammonite is painfully accurate.
May I draw you?
Yes. May I draw you?
Yes.
And may I draw you drawing her? Yes.
Carol is unique amongst this catalog for one major reason. It's the only entry with a happy ending.
Tragedy is an important genre of entertainment, but for several decades, its place in queer stories was an imposed mandate. The Hays Code, also known as the Motion Picture Production Code, was a list of industry guidelines and censorship rules that promoted traditional values and forbid things like homosexuals, mixed-race relationships, and extramarital sex from appearing on screen. If something morally distasteful did happen in a movie, it had to either be punished by the narrative or shown as categorically wrong. Thus, the few gay characters we did get from this era all suffered tragic fates. These regulations were in effect from 1934 to 1968, and even though we're nearly a century removed from their implementation, the conventions they established linger on to this day.
So why does this trend still persist in a post-Hays Code world? I have two theories.
The first is that our culture likes to fetishize suffering. We mistake it for something that's intrinsically artistic, and we prop up the stereotype of a poor, tormented creative laboring over the work that will both be their salvation and their doom.
Well, that was dumb.
Hot take. Romanticizing mental illness is bad. Don't do it.
Aye, aye, Captain Trench!
My other theory is linked to a quote I first heard from my favorite high school English teacher.
Miss Scalf, if you ever watch this video, I just want you to know, I tanked the AP exam on purpose. All I cared about was winning the highest GPA in class, and once I knew that was secure, I completely checked out.
Tragedy, Miss Scalf said, should be the ice pick to the frozen heart of the human condition. It exists to elicit an intense array of emotions we wouldn't otherwise seek out. Heartache, anger, melancholia.
In a lot of ways, these stories are kind of reassuring.
Sorrow may feel isolating, but in actuality, it's a universal experience, and this knowledge can help someone form a deeper sense of empathy. Perhaps so many queer love stories still end sadly because filmmakers want to foster a deeper understanding of the LGBTQ community within the general public by showcasing our rawest displays of humanity. Studies have indeed proven that media representation can successfully shape perceptions, influence attitudes, and drive societal change.
Here's the caveat. Joy is just as humanizing as tragedy, if not more so.
Queer happiness is so fucking beautiful, and we deserve to see it on our screens.
That's not to say gay characters aren't allowed to die anymore. Everybody dies.
But the years' worth of love two people can cultivate together is significantly more valuable than however that relationship comes to an end.
What a strange girl you are.
Why?
Flung out of space.
This is the most famous line from The Price of Salt. So much so that a graphic novel based on Patricia Highsmith's life references it in its title. Yet people struggle with deciphering its true meaning.
Both in and out of context, it's a weird statement to make. And as far as compliments go, it's not the best.
You fight good.
But when Carol says it again on New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, in Waterloo, her meaning becomes clear.
I hate you. Flung out of space.
The line invokes the sheer cosmic craziness of falling in love.
There are millions of songs, books, and movies dedicated to exploring this subject, yet romantic love's prominence in pop culture has ironically desensitized us to its innate insanity. It's an absurd combination of luck and hard work, of timing and coincidence, of passion and peace. To build a life with someone is to create a small miracle, especially if you're queer.
It was so easy for a man and woman to find each other, to find someone who would do, but for her to have found Carol...
She just reached in, put a string of lights around my heart.
I'm not overly vocal about my own queerness, partly because I value my privacy, but mostly because growing up gay in the Deep South leaves you with an ever-tangled mess of internalized issues to work through.
My friend Cole likes to joke that I'm not in the closet, but rather trapped inside of one of those clear plastic cake containers.
I tend to defer to the braver members of the community to analyze films like this, because it feels like they're significantly more qualified than me to do so. Even when you factor out my severe imposter syndrome, Carol doesn't exactly coalesce with my other uploads on this channel. It's not one of my favorite movies, nor was it my lesbian awakening. I have Buffy Season 3 to thank for that.
Yeah, what's up? Hey, time to motivate. Really, we're just good friends.
I wanted to talk about Carol because it reconfigured a key aspect of my day-to-day thinking.
When I first started coming out to people, I heavily relied on the phrase love is love to get me through the ensuing awkward conversations. By no means did I owe anyone an explanation, but people still wanted one regardless. Nothing's worse than having to repeatedly justify your own feelings and experiences. Over time, I came to resent this platitude. It felt too simple, too saccharine. Love wasn't just love. Homophobes wouldn't let it be. The United States' current administration is so inept and dangerous that the Human Rights Campaign declared a national state of emergency for LGBTQ Americans. And when Kim Davis petitioned the Supreme Court to rehear Obergefell v. Hodges this past year, I found myself spiraling like never before. I couldn't stop asking myself, why? Why do our rights constantly have to be threatened? Why must idiots govern the blind? Why are people filled with so much baseless, wasteful hate?
In the midst of all this despair, I decided to rewatch Carol.
Love is love could easily be the tagline for this movie. Its unwillingness to dwell on queer misery is a breath of fresh fucking air, and its conclusion is powerfully reaffirming. Despite all the attempts to silence us, to criminalize us, to break us down and destroy our wills, we've persevered, and we will continue to persevere. History wants to suppress us, to erase our stories and hide our visibility, but we have always existed, and we always will exist. Things are bleak right now, but I have faith in us, because love is love, and that's that.
The only crime Therese is guilty of committing is thinking that her bangs look good here. Her hairdresser did her so dirty.
And you look very fine, you know?
I guess love really is blind.